Taking that off the table, I think the other biggest concern with the Eagles is, can this defense actually do anything against a quarterback who isn't one of the worst quarterbacks in the league and is actually a quarterback worth a darn? And I think it would be nice to see some encouraging progress from them. Obviously, they're limited in what they can do in a practice setting with no real pass rush and everything, but you would like to see some encouraging signs on that front. You want to see what Jonathan Gannon has planned in terms of a hybrid defense, if that's going to be the case. Are we going to see more 3-4 looks? So really kind of interested to see what we see on the defensive side of the ball, especially with the thought that, typically earlier in camp, there is thought that the defense has an advantage early on. So you would hope that's the case.
BLG, talk to me.
Yeah, there we go.
There we go.
There we go.
Yes.
Sorry about that.
Not a problem.
No worries. It happens all the time.
Rough start to training camp for me.
There you go. But that's why they have training camp.
Of course.
That's why we will punch you up just a couple of minutes after. Are you ready for some grass time, Mr. Gowton?
I am, Jody. We've had this layoff, a lot of hype around this team. It's finally time to get to see what they look like in a full practice setting, not just the 7-on-7 that we saw briefly in OTAs.
What's most interesting for you as you head into this camp? I think the quarterback is obvious, so I'll take that off the table, BLG. But other than Jalen Hurts, what about this team are you most interested to clarify, or at least somewhat clarify, as they get to training camp and get on the field and get into the summer?
I do think how Hurts performs is meaningful, considering, we saw Carson Wentz play really good before that 2017 season in camp, and then really bad, I would say, or at least not great ahead of the 2020 season. But taking that off the table, I think the other biggest concern with the Eagles is, can this defense actually do anything against a quarterback who isn't one of the worst quarterbacks in the league and is actually a quarterback worth a darn? And I think it would be nice to see some encouraging progress from them. Obviously, they're limited in what they can do in a practice setting with no real pass rush and everything, but you would like to see some encouraging signs on that front. You want to see what Jonathan Gannon has planned in terms of a hybrid defense, if that's going to be the case. Are we going to see more 3-4 looks? So really kind of interested to see what we see on the defensive side of the ball, especially with the thought that, typically earlier in camp, there is thought that the defense has an advantage early on. So you would hope that's the case with all these defensive improvements that they've made.
One of the things that will intrigue me, and I'm waiting to hear you guys be able to at least put forth an opinion. Again, it cannot be a definitive opinion because they'll be doing as much or not as much as they will. But I'm very intrigued by the other Brandon Lee. That would be Mr. Graham. Coming back from basically a full year injury. We know that the intangibles are what they are. He's probably the biggest leader in the Eagles locker room, brings positive energy wherever he goes. But the bottom line is, can he still perform? Is he still physically capable of doing what Brandon Lee Graham has done for the last decade? How can we? Is there any way you can even begin to get a guess on that as to what Graham actually looks like in the workouts that the Eagles will have before the first game of the season?
Well, I like that you pointed out that his initials are indeed BLG as well, Jody, because everyone likes to just call him BG, but let's get the real 3 full initials in there.
Exactly.
I would like to see him healthy. I mean, that's a first start. See him actually practice full and out there on the field, no restrictions. I think Brandon Graham is a kind of guy who, despite the fact that I think he's 34 now, his age 34 season, he played so few snaps earlier in his career, where if you contrast him with someone like Fletcher Cox, who's actually a little bit younger and entered the NFL later than Brandon Graham did, Fletcher Cox has played, I think, over 1,000 more snaps than Brandon Graham. So I think he might have more tread. Yeah, it's
a good point.
It's really wild. It doesn't match up with what you would expect. But I think BG still has a lot of gas in the tank, so to speak. Unless look, it's a serious injury, so sometimes that just saps a player for their career. But if there's someone who I think might be able to push through that, I would say Brandon Graham is one of those guys.
Yeah, he looked in phenomenal shape in the spring. And it's interesting. I think Brandon, I say all the time, is one of the most underrated players in Eagles history, believe it or not, because he's turned into such a good player. If he had BLG's length, he would be a Hall of Famer. That's all he's missing. That's why he's not a finisher. He's a little bit too small from a traditional standpoint. Doesn't have the long arms to be the great finishers, the pass rush, but he is a great player. And at 34, he looks like he's in the best shape of his life. I was just talking about Jody about pup guys. We kind of know our buddy Jimmy Kempski broke way back that Tyree Jackson, Brett Toth are going to start on the pup list. No surprise there. Isaac Seumalo, though, he mentioned at the end of spring that he was not fully cleared, even though he was working during OTA. So he's going to be an interesting one to me. If he starts on the pup list, how do you kind of handicap that right guard position with Isaac Seumalo versus Jack Driscoll?
I think Seumalo is going to be the guy in the end. I think he's the favorite. We have to note here, for as much as Isaac Seumalo has had injury issues the past couple of years, I think he's only played in 12 games or so.
Yeah.
9. Jack Driscoll also gets hurt a lot. I mean, he's been on IR multiple times in the past 2 seasons. So it's not like durability has been a strength for him as well. And that's why I think right guard, while certainly not a concern relative to many other offensive line situations in the NFL, is a bit of a situation for the Eagles to figure out because of the injury issues there, because of Seumalo going from the left side over to the right, where he really hasn't taken reps extensively, at least in a long time. So it's definitely another position to watch.
All right. If you're a reader of Bleeding Green Nation, then you know that BLG does a great job of giving you guys content all off-season long, which is where you actually have to work to come up with topics and angles to look at. And BLG came up with a good one last week. And when I text him and asked him if he would come on with us today, I said, well, your ears ringing, because we had your buddy John Stolness on the day that you came out with ranking the positions in just the NFC East. The different way to look at it, who would be the starters if you took in all the players at the positions from the 4 teams in the NFC East. And you had to have Eagle fans smiling, BLG, because you had Jaquiski Tart as the number 2 safety in the NFC East, and you had Kaiser White as the number 2 linebacker in the entire NFC East. I said, I don't think Jaquiski Tart and Kaiser White are the number 2 linebacker at their position on just the Eagles, let alone the entire NFC East. Let's go in order. Safety first. What is it about Jaquiski Tart that you like as much as you do?
Well, for the record, Jody, I will say this is not me. This is one of my writers for BGN.
Wasn't you? Okay, my bad. I'm sorry.
It's all right. But I will say, because I did an NFC East, all NFC East team on the podcast version for one of our podcasts on the Bleeding Green Nation feed. But I did not have Tart there. Although I think, it's not like there's exactly a lot of great safeties in the NFC East. So, I mean, you can go with a Jaron Curse. I think you would have to right now over him. But I think he could kind of that was a career year for him last year. I don't know that he's necessarily going to be able to replicate that after kind of being a non-impact player / journeyman earlier in his career. So, I mean, I don't even know if Tart is starting here. He's going to be competing for playing time. I think all 3 of those safeties between Marcus Epps, Anthony Harris, and Tart are all going to split playing time in some capacity. I mean, that's really what the Eagles did last year. They weren't just putting Rodney McLeod out there like they usually did under Jim Schwartz and have him play 100% of the snaps. He was rotating with Epps and Harris. So I think they're going to have a 3-man rotation there. And then at linebacker, I mean, I think Kaiser White has a decent case. I mean, again, the division is not exactly loaded at linebacker. You could go with Blake Martinez over him for sure. Obviously, Parsons has one of those spots locked down. No argument there. But beyond him, I think it's kind of open. And I think White's an interesting player. He's coming off a career year. The Eagles made a serious investment in him relative to previous off seasons. They gave him $5 million. I know a Chargers writer from SB Nation's Chargers coverage that really, laments the Chargers he thinks the Chargers had a great offseason, but the one thing they messed up is not re-signing Kaiser White. So I definitely think he's going to be an interesting player to watch in camp as well.
Brandon, let's talk about the rotational aspect of what you just mentioned, because I think a lot of us think all three safeties are going to play. I think a lot of us think, three linebackers are going to play, and they're going to mix and match with TJ and Kaiser and Nakobe Dean, maybe even throw some Davion Taylor in there. You think that's a good thing or a bad thing? I mean, these are not traditionally rotational positions. And you mentioned last year the Eagles rotated safeties, but did they want to or did they have to? And that's where I kind of see them this year. Certainly at safety, not as much as linebacker, where you hope two guys kind of seize the position. But do you think it's good to rotate? Do you think it's ahead of the curve, or do you think that's a signal of more of a weakness?
I think it's making the most of what you have. Obviously, if you have two studs there, you're just going to play them and you're not going to take them off the field. But when you don't, I think you try to make the most of different skill sets. And for Nakobe Dean specifically, I'll mention him. I think what he provides as a blitzer, as a pass rusher, has some value. And I think there are going to be certain looks where he's going to be allowed to do that. And the Eagles hopefully won't maximize his strength in that regard. I think there are other situations where you might want someone like Kaiser White, who might be a little bit more athletic and the size and everything, and have him out there. Obviously, TJ Edwards, we know to be really good in run defense, maybe not always so much in always wanting him dropping back into coverage on passing down. So, I think it's kind of just trying to make the most of what your players are good at.
Speaking of making most of what your players are good at, the addition of A.J. Brown is surely going to help the entire Eagle offense. He's borderline one of the top 10 wide receivers in the National Football League, and he should be able to make plays and do things for the Eagles this year. The actual patterns that they run, the XYZ of wide receiving, we know what Devontae Smith was asked to do and what he achieved last year. How is the presence of A.J. Brown going to change? We'll see the production after each and every single game and compare it to the kind of season that he had last year. But just conceptually, how does A.J. Brown being added to the lineup change what Devonta Smith's role is going to be with this team?
Yeah, I think in theory, it should free up Devontae Smith to have less attention on him in terms of you can't just always put your best corner on Devontae Smith. Like in theory, at least you could last year because he was the only really legitimate wide receiver target on the team. AJ Brown has really made his living off the middle of the field. More recently, last year, I believe 60% of his targets came in that area, which is a really interesting contrast with Jalen Hurts throwing the ball over the middle of the field only 10% of the time, which is the fewest in the NFL, well below the NFL average of like 22%. So that something's going to give there. I mean, you would think Jalen Hurts is going to have to utilize the middle of the field more, but it's not only like Brown is, valuable in that regard in terms of running over the middle and making tough catches as much as he, and this is represented in his yards per reception number. He can make big plays too, down the field, vertical threat. So I think the interesting thing about these receivers is they can kind of win in a number of different ways. I think Devontae, people don't think of him necessarily as a deep threat, and we didn't see a ton of that last year, but I think he has that ability. And I know, John, we saw some of that in OTAs in very limited sample size, but he can certainly burn cornerbacks deep down the field. So I think you can kind of use these guys in different ways. I think you can mix and match. I don't think anyone is really pigeonholed to like one certain thing, or you might think of Quez Watkins only as a burner, but I think he has some jump ball ability as well. So I think there's a lot of versatility here.
We've gone about 20 minutes, BLG, without talking about the quarterback a little bit, but so let's get to the quarterback. And, Mike Sando does this survey of NFL executives and coaches every year. And I think it's the best sort of indication of what the league thinks about quarterbacks, good or bad. And you can disagree with them, agree with them. But, it's a tier system, and Jalen Hurts was placed in tier 3 at number 20. I think the league was trolling us. He was tied with Carson Wentz at number 20.
Well, that one I'm going to give to Mike Sando. He might have just moved the needle a little bit to make it a tie at number 20 between Jalen and Carson.
Are you surprised at where he landed? A little bit too low. I think the tier is right. Too low, too high. And I think the more important part is there are a couple coaches who thought he had the potential to go to tier 2. Nobody said tier 1. You think that's too harsh, or you agree with that?
I think it was spot on, really. I mean, you can kind of nitpick, it should be 20, it could be, 17, whatever. But like you said, the tier, I think ultimately is in the right place. And the description of that tier was like quarterbacks who basically you can win with, but you need to rely on a strong supporting cast and a heavy running game. And as I like to say a billion times about Jalen Hurts, the Eagles ran the ball more than any other team or they threw the ball in terms of passing play percentage, less than any team last year. So they very much needed to rely on things. And to his credit, he did enough in his part to, again, be able to allow the Eagles to win with him. But I think ideally, when you're signing a quarterback to one of these massive extensions, like the Cardinals just did with Kyler Murray, you want to sign a guy like that. And I'm not the biggest Kyler Murray guy, but that's a different thing. Yeah. Because they have at least flashes of like, we can win with this guy and he can carry us in certain moments. And I just don't think we've seen that with Hurts. It doesn't mean he can't get there. But I think right now, how I feel about Hurts is how I kind of feel about the Eagles as a whole. And it's that I think there's a very high floor to work with there, but I think there's a low ceiling.
We talk about Mr. Hurts plenty here in this town, and well, we should, because any year, any time, the Eagles quarterback is going to be the number one talked about position in the sporting world in Philadelphia. So it's usually here. Jalen Hurts this season probably should be, and because of the questions that are attached to Jalen this time, it kind of runs through the ceiling. He answers all the questions correctly, and he's got a great feel for the position that he's in as the quarterback of the Philadelphia Eagles and the whole rat poison thing. He handles his business well on the microphone. Do we have the faith that what he says is the exact same way that he reacts, that he really doesn't allow the scrutiny, the unbelievable scrutiny of being the Eagles quarterback, get inside his head? He seems to handle his questioning superbly. Does he do that when he's on the field with his teammates?
I think so. I think we've seen evidence that, the players love him. And I think he checks all the boxes really in terms of the intangibles, mobility. It's everything, but one of the most important parts of being a quarterback, which is, the passing ability and the processing, which is evidenced in him having one of the slowest times to throw in the NFL. And not really working the middle of the field and not having that mastery yet. And again, I keep saying it's not like the book has been written on him yet and everything's final. He's only 23. He's entering his 3rd season in the league, his 2nd as a full-time starter. So the potential is there, but it's not like unlimited potential. It's not like, a sky high. To your point, John, about what these NFL execs are seeing, and it doesn't mean they're right just because they said it. I mean, people are wrong within the league
all the time.
But the idea that like there's not like people here being like, oh, there's tier 1 upside. I think that kind of matches what we all kind of are seeing here. We've never seen like this is a special difference maker kind of quarterback, and he doesn't necessarily have to be. Not only those quarterbacks win. Matthew Stafford was in that tier 2 in those rankings, and obviously the Rams just won a Super Bowl, but of course they had a loaded roster around him. So, there's a path there, but ideally, you want that elite quarterback. So you're in the hunt every year, like the Chiefs are, like the Packers are, like these elite teams are. So that should be the goal. And I feel like for an organization that has an owner who said he's obsessed, with an elite passing offense, and certainly put a lot of resources into trying to find the quarterback. I don't think good enough is going to be good enough for him at some point.
Well, you make a good point, Brandon. To play a little bit of a devil's advocate, I do think there's a special part of Jalen Hurts' skill set, and that is the ability to extend plays and the off-schedule offense and the mobility. As you mentioned, though, conventional thinking is you got to throw the ball on 3rd down. That's what somebody said in the piece. If you can't win on 3rd down, if you can't, the the backboard hit the ground and you can convert 3rd and 7, all that kind of stuff. The NFL's never going to let you into that tier 1 category. They kind of mentioned it with Lamar Jackson, who's already won an MVP in this league. Nick Sirianni in the offseason kind of, raised my eyebrows a little bit because he's constantly said the 4 things he looks at quarterback are accuracy, decision-making, those movement skills, and arm strength. But he said accuracy is number 1, decision-making is number 2. And then he kind of hedged and he was like, but that off-schedule stuff. And he said, I believe his quote was, sometimes you don't know what you have till you have it. And he is special from that perspective, but you got to build around that. Can the Eagles accept that and build around that? Because he's never going to be the tier 1 thrower. I don't think there's even uncertainty there. We know that. He's never going to be Justin Herbert as a young quarterback, Joe Burrow, but he's special in a different way. So why not build around that? Can the Eagles do that?
I don't think they want to, based on all the resources they've put in, trying to revamp the passing attack between, trading for AJ Brown and, having Devontae Smith here and then paying Dallas Goedert and, all these things where I think it's very clear they want to be able to pass the ball. They've always been pass heavy under Jeffrey Lurie. It's not just about Andy Reid or Doug Peterson. It's about the organizational philosophy of passing the ball. So I think it's tough to assume they want to be like the Ravens. And I also think it's tough to think that that's definitely a great strategy that works. I mean, Lamar Jackson has obviously been a sensational talent in the regular season. His playoff numbers are really, really bad. Like, I don't know if people fully realize how bad they are. Like, go look up his passer rating in those games. I don't even know if he has one above 80. Like, it's been bad. You need to be able to pass the ball at a high level, ultimately at some point in the playoffs. And I think the Eagles are, again, giving Jalen Hurts an opportunity to try to do that. And I agree with you, John. There's some value in the off structure, ability there, but it has to be balanced. That can't be your bread and butter. And I think that's the problem, or it was last year, especially against the better teams. Certainly the Tampa Bay Buccaneers didn't work against them. So I think there needs to be more of a balance there between, being able to kind of execute from the pocket and get the ball quick at times. And then there's, you pick and choose your spots where you need to extend plays and make something happen.
All right, PLG, there are no ties in this next question. I need you to give me a definitive order. If you want to explain it and say how close they are or how much distance there is between, feel free. But give me the order of your ranking of the 4 coaching staffs in the NFC East.
Yeah, I'm going to go with – I'm not a Mike McCarthy believer. I'm really not. So I'm going to have to go with the Eagles, number 1. I don't know if Nick Sirianni gives the Eagles a huge edge. I still have questions about that. But I think we've seen enough of a floor there, kind of like the quarterback position, where I know the bottom isn't going to completely fall out. So I'll put that. I know McCarthy has the Super Bowl ring. I know the Cowboys won the East last year. But the fact that he seems like a dead man walking and there's Sean Payton rumors, I just don't love. And combined with the whole offseason that the Cowboys have had of just – not feeling good. I'll put them number 2. I'll put Rivera number 3 right now, just because he's been there before and nothing special, but has been solid. And then Dable, I think the Giants have the potential to have something there with not only him, but also, Wink Martindale at defensive coordinator. They got Mike Kafka, former Eagles quarterback, as we know, at offensive coordinator. So I think there's potential for that staff, but I'm not going to just assume they're great until we actually see some results. So I'll put them at 4.
Fair enough.
Yeah, the Giants, and by the way, follow Brandon at Brandon Gowton on Twitter. You can read him at Bleeding Green Nation. Does a tremendous job there. Podcast all over the place, PLG. When it comes to the Giants, they've been really since Tom Coughlin and Jerry Reese, and they moved on. They've made bad decision after bad decision after bad decision. You're starting to see that worm turn a little bit, because I look up the turnpike. Now, I don't think it's going to manifest itself this year. I don't think Eagles fans have to worry this year. But they finally seem to be making some good decisions. You mentioned it in the coaching staff with Wink Martindale. Mike Kafka's really highly regarded guy. They get 2 top 10 talents, and those guys are talented. I don't know if they'll develop, but when you talk about ceiling versus floor, those guys got high ceilings. Kayvon Thibodeau, Evan Neal. Worry you a little bit that the Giants are finally starting to make some decent decisions?
Absolutely. Not this year, like you said, but I think I kind of look at it as, the Giants before, they're climbing a mountain and there's no even clear path to get to the top. Like there's just, it's a total, there's, like landslides covering the trails and everything. They're just stuck. They have nowhere to go. They still just mountain to climb. Now the path is clear, but it's a big mountain to climb, but at least they can see the way up. And it's a matter of, okay, can they actually execute this and make it up there? I think they have a good foundation right now in place. And I think how they've been honest with themselves in terms of they realized this isn't a foundation for us to build on right away and like go all in this year and try to win immediately. We kind of need to continue to strip down this roster like they did by getting rid of James Bradbury, which is going to hurt now. But in the long term, getting that cap space probably makes the most sense for them and kind of being able to build up after this year and not committing a bunch of money to players now. I think that's the right move for them to kind of take a step back to hopefully take a step forward next year. Again, I think Dable could be worth something. They have, ammunition to potentially, be in the quarterback market if they want, or if they have to potentially when they realize Daniel Jones probably isn't the guy. So still have to get that quarterback position right at some point, and we'll see if they can. But I think the coaching staff offers optimism. I think the front office with Joe Shane offers some optimism. So they're definitely, look what they've had in the past between Dave Gettleman and Pat Shurmur and Ben McAdoo and Joe Judge. Like, they're a laughing stock. They were a joke. And now I think they have some level of credibility.
All right, BLG, Johnny asked you about this earlier, but I'll widen the focus a little bit. You talked about the right tackle position. The right guard position, excuse me. What quote-unquote camp battle is the one that intrigues you most, that you actually think you can debate right now as to who's going to get how many reps, who's going to be on the field more than someone else? Just from your own debating standpoint, which one do you think is the best camp battle as they actually report for the first day today?
Yeah, I'm interested to see how linebacker really shakes out, because I think people think Nakobe Dean's going to come in and be like this day one starter. But that's really not the case, at least from the jump. Like Kaiser White and TJ Edwards were the guys in OTAs. And I think it's not just going to be them falling by the wayside and becoming irrelevant. Like Nakobe Dean's going to have to earn his playing time. And I think he will have a role this year, but I kind of question how big that role will be. So, and I'm just really interested to see him because this is a guy, as we know, who everyone thought was going to go higher. But there was weird, kind of injury stuff there. You have the Giants GM, who we were just speaking of, saying that there were some things there that he didn't want to get into. So I want to see if can Nakobe Dean actually stay fully healthy and prove there's no issues in training camp and hold up. Because, again, I don't want to compare him to Sidney Jones, but back in the day, everyone thought Sidney Jones was the steal. And training camp after training camp, he couldn't even stay healthy. So really interested to see the linebacker spot.
BLG at Bleeding Green Nation, bleedinggreennation.com, does a wonderful job. I will see you tomorrow,
yes.
Brandon Lee Gowton, hopefully for some grass time. Now, no pads until, what did I tell you, Jody? Day 8, I believe.
8 or 9, yeah, I think it was.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. So we're not going to see the pads for a while, but hopefully it's not going to be as hot. So we'll get a little bit of a break there. Still going to be hot, just not oppressively hot.
All right, BLG, let me wrap it up on this note. And I think John would probably disagree with this. I should know this because we do it every single day. How many touchdowns are Eagles going to beat the Lions by opening week?
I've got the Lions winning that game, Jody.
No, you don't.
Yeah, I love it.
No. Don't say that. Don't even kid Gowton.
It's
the Lions winning that game.
It's a tough spot. it's Dan. Look, Dan Campbell is out for revenge after the Eagles blew out the Lions in Detroit last year. It's the revenge
was
game.
Out for revenge all year last year. How many games did he win?
Here's another thing that I will say that kind of worries me.
Kneecaps, Jody, man.
They're going to bite the Eagles' kneecaps. Historically, have the Eagles been good at living up to high expectations? It's hard to say the definitively yes to that. So that's just something to watch for.
Yeah, that's true. When they won the Super Bowl, they weren't supposed to win the Super Bowl, so the expectations weren't what they are. They probably weren't even as high in that season as they are coming into this season.
Oh, yeah.
But you're blatantly wrong. They win them by at least 2 touchdowns. But BLG, you know, we love whenever you come on with us. J-Mac's looking to hang out with you this week. Have a good time. Thanks much. We'll get you up again. Before that all-important Lion blowout week number 1. That's for damn sure.
Sounds good, guys. Thanks for having me.
Thanks. Great.